Hey everyone, welcome back to the Irretrievable Breakdown podcast where we discuss all things divorce. I'm Matt Dolan with Dolan Divorce Lawyers in Connecticut, and I am joined by my co-host and the managing partner of our firm, Nicole Bikakis. You can catch our show on YouTube or you can listen on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. Now today we are going to discuss how much a divorce actually costs in Connecticut and what can impact that cost being higher or lower. But Nicole, before we do that, tell me, how's your weekend? How's your week going so far? Give me a little life update.
Life update. Weekend was good. We had my brother-in-law and his wife and kid up staying with us for the weekend, which was fun. And kids got to see all their cousins, so that was fun. And then the week has just started. I don't know. It's fine. It's a rainy day.
Yes.
How about you?
I was worried there was going to be like no sunlight. Like sometimes when it's dark, it's like really like I look like a ghoul here in my office because I rely on the natural sunlight. But we got a little sunlight peeking through, so we're good. But it's going well. I was just at the gym, so I got to tell you about Gym Rat Matt at the gym. So there's this guy who looks exactly like me, apparently. Like I've had our mutual friend Michelle, her and her husband have like coined him Gym Rat Matt because they always think it's me.
You were talking about yourself for a second.
No. I would not coin myself Gym Rat Matt. He looks exactly like me, except he's like stronger and he always has like a tank top on, which I'm not like a tank top guy at the gym. I just wear a normal t-shirt.
Have you seen him?
Oh yeah.
Do you agree that you look like him?
I feel like it's hard to I feel like when you're looking at yourself, I feel like you're less likely to be like that person looks exactly like me. It's usually like other people identifying, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like nobody says like that person looks exactly like me.
Got it.
Although I do think I look like Jordan Spieth, who is a professional golfer.
Yeah, I don't know.
So people can let me know if I do. Anyway, so Gym Rat Matt, he's got that name because he's a little stronger than me, and like just he's at the gym a lot.
A little stronger, a lot stronger.
Probably maybe a lot stronger. I don't know, but he so like our mutual friend Michelle called him Gym Rat Matt. Like our neighbor Emily like went and said hi to me in the parking lot at the gym and was like Matt, and like chased me down. Turns out it was not me. It was Gym Rat Matt. So today like some completely random guy came up to me and goes, Hey, you and that guy twins? Like so there's apparently we look a lot alike.
There's some truth to it. There has to be.
Yeah. But like the problem is Gym Rat Matt has some strange behavior. Like he you don't
want Gym Rat Matt's behavior attributed to you.
Exactly. So like sometimes when he's at the gym, he's doing the jump rope. And again, he's like a little stronger than me. And this dude, Gym Rat Matt, jump rope so fast, I think he's gonna like take somebody's head off if they're walking by. And that's one thing, but like most alarmingly is Gym Rat Matt spends a lot of time naked in the locker room. Like there's been times when I've gone to the gym and, I go and I put my stuff in the locker room and Gym Rat Matt's sitting there naked and I have my workout. It's like 45 minute workout. And I come back and Gym Rat Matt's still naked in the locker room. And it's like, what's going on?
I feel like gym management might need to get involved.
Yeah. So it's like, I'm worried, like, are people going to be like, hey, like my divorce lawyer, he's spending a lot of time naked in the locker room at the gym. So
that is kind of horrifying.
So we'll see. Hopefully not.
Michelle's so good at coining names and
yes.
Gym Rat Matt. I love that.
So that's my interesting thing that happened to me today is someone thought that Gym Rat Matt was my twin.
I love it. Maybe he watches this podcast.
Hopefully not, because Gym Rat Matt might beat me up if he's watching. let's get to the topic at hand here, which is how much a divorce actually costs in Connecticut. And the reality is, it's very hard to predict how much a divorce will cost, especially if you have an attorney. It's more predictable if you don't have an attorney, because generally speaking, it's sort of just the filing fee. But if you do not have an attorney, it's really hard to know whether your case is going to resolve very quickly or whether it's going to be a long and drawn out process. And one factor that impacts how much your divorce will cost is the complexity, how much financial stuff needs to be sorted out, how much custody stuff needs to be sorted out. But it's so that's a piece of it, is how financially complex is your case. But more, the larger factor in what the cost is going to be is how much conflict is there in your divorce. So, is it something where you and your spouse are going to be able to resolve it relatively quickly and early on? Or is it going to be constant fighting over every little aspect of a divorce where there's attorneys dedicating hours and hours and hours to your case to try to resolve it, and ultimately having to have a trial, etc. So that is the largest driving factor to how much your divorce is going to cost, is the level of conflict.
Level of conflict, the specific issues in your case too, and is there, with advice of counsel, something you can do to minimize those issues moving into the divorce and trying to get a resolution? And then, of course, the personalities, right? The behaviors of both parties is really going to be the driving factor here.
Right. So let me first explain sort of how attorneys' fees generally work. So normally you're going to pay a retainer to your attorney, and that's essentially a deposit. So it may be a $5,000 to $10,000 retainer deposit, and then they will bill hourly. So, it could be anywhere from, 350, 400 up to, some of the attorneys down in Fairfield County charge, close to $1,000 an hour. But I would say the normal range is probably 400 to like 550, I would say. So that hourly rate will come out of that retainer deposit. So you'll get monthly statements that show, all right, how much of the deposit have you used? And generally speaking, if you deplete a certain amount of that retainer deposit, you're going to have to replenish it as an additional deposit. So that retainer is not a predictor of how much your divorce is ultimately going to cost. It is just a deposit that you will need to refresh if you deplete that retainer. And then, sometimes the attorney will take like a trial retainer. So if you're having to have a trial, that's going to cost a significant amount of money. So they may take a much larger chunk, maybe $25,000, $50,000, 10,000, it depends on how complex your trial is going to be. And that will cover that trial. But so generally speaking, attorneys' fees in divorce cases are just hourly billing of the attorney's time. Some attorneys, it's like pretty rare, will charge a flat fee or maybe a flat fee for different stages of the case. But that's pretty rare because, again, it's hard to charge a flat fee for a divorce when you have no idea how complex it's going to be. So at least here in Connecticut, I don't really know of, I think I know of a couple attorneys that charge a flat fee, but I don't know that it works particularly well for their business. It's more just maybe out of laziness that they don't want to track their hours.
And I think it's one of the most common questions we get when people initially call into our office. Like, how much is this going to cost me? Can you give me an estimate? Like, ballpark figure here. What am I looking at? And it really is extremely hard to give that ballpark figure. I think more often than not, that retainer that you're paying is going to be like almost the minimum you spend, unless your case really is primed to settle and we can fast track it to a resolution at the beginning. But you can expect to spend that initial retainer down. And again, that retainer is for future work that has not yet been done. It's a deposit towards future attorney's fees. And then it becomes a matter of how often do you need to replenish that retainer over the course and lifetime of your case. And how much work is getting done. You might have like a really busy month where the retainer really depletes fast. And then on other months, there's not as much work going on in your case while we're still waiting on discovery to be exchanged. So it varies in terms of how much a retainer is getting spent down on any given month during the pendency of your divorce. And so really most firms should and do provide itemized invoices showing what work was done and how much time was spent and what has been depleted from the retainer every month, so that it's so important if you have an attorney representing you, that you are paying attention to your invoices and you're paying attention to what's in your retainer and you're factoring that into your positions in the case and what you're deciding to fight over, what you're asking your attorney to do, because your attorney is providing you a service and there's a cost associated with that service, right? And so the longer you want to um pursue specific claims or issues at the cost of, let's say, settling, just know that your attorney will absolutely represent you and do those things for you, but it's going to come at a cost.
Right. Right. So I think what Nicole's trying to say there is like, don't spend, 3 hours of your attorney's time at $500 an hour for a total of $1,500 to fight over $1,000 item. It doesn't make sense.
Well, and I think our clients, no matter how much you say this to them at the beginning, and this is something that we advise the clients. This is an hourly rate. This is an hourly service that you're paying for, and the retainer is not an estimate of the total cost, and our retainer agreements lay out very clearly how the fees work and that your retainer will replenish, and then you have to re-up. And usually most clients, what they do is they sign on, and then that first month that we're retained, a lot of times we're getting phone calls every day, every issue. They want to bring to their attorney every little thing their spouse is doing, and they want to talk through it. Then they get that first bill and they realize, oh, it really is like, how much time is my attorney spending on talking to me, reading my emails, responding to my emails, calling me back? That all is a cost and that's going against your retainer. And so after that first invoice, a lot of times people will actually they adjust how much they utilize the attorney on things that they can really manage themselves, right? Really have to manage how you utilize your attorney if you're concerned about how much you're spending on your attorney.
Right. Right. I wouldn't say most clients do that, but some do. But if you're trying to be economical about what you're spending on attorney's fees, just, try to be efficient with your communication, batch your emails to your attorneys where you're not like any little thing that comes up, you're emailing your attorney. Obviously, if it's like a time sensitive thing, maybe you reach out to your attorney about it, but maybe you keep a running list of things you want to discuss with them. And then once a week, send an email for an update, that way your attorney's not constantly replying to you. That can help you kind of keep your bill in check.
And not to mention, if you are and you're going to be asked to provide documents, discovery, statements, things that you need to produce, producing documents to your attorney in an easy to read electronic format that's organized is going to, again, help with minimizing how much time is spent having to organize that discovery and look through it. Of course, we have to look through everything that's provided to us. That's part of our jobs. But there's a way to give documents to your attorney that's going to ensure that more time is needed to be spent on organization, right? So if you're providing like paper statements that are all jumbled up and things are missing, and then we have to go back to you to ask for the missing documents and organize those, that's going to deplete your retainer because of all the work that needs to be done to organize it. Because then we have to, not only do we need it organized for our own purposes, but then we're going to have to produce it to the other side, whether it's opposing counsel or another party, and we need to be producing it in an organized fashion. We can't just be giving them a whole bunch of documents that are completely disorganized.
Right, right. So the more you can organize them electronically, put them into subfolders, for example, title the documents appropriately so that they stay in date order. That can all be helpful to reducing the time that your attorney, or oftentimes it's their paralegal, who will have, a paralegal will also bill at an hourly rate that will be, a little bit lower than the attorney's rate. So it's their time that is often spent on organizing these documents. But let's separate from the attorney's time, let's talk about other costs that are involved in a divorce. So there are fixed costs like the filing fee. It's a $360 filing fee to file a divorce. If you're the defendant and you're filing a cross complaint, there's a filing fee associated with the cross complaint. What is that? Is that
I think it's like
4 or 5?
180
Oh yeah, 180, I think.
right now.
For the cross complaint. Then if you're the plaintiff, you may have to have a marshal serve your spouse. That usually can cost about $100. If there is a custody dispute and you're getting a guardian ad litem appointed in your case, and that's an individual who represents the best interest of the child, their fees will generally work in the same way as an attorney's fees, where there is a retainer that is paid to them, and then their hourly rate, which is going to be similar to your attorney's hourly rate. Most guardian ad litems in Connecticut are attorneys, so they might, they'll charge similar rates to what your attorney is. And that hourly rate will come out of the guardian ad litem's retainer. And as far as like how those fees are split, oftentimes it's split 50-50 between the parties. But it really depends. If one of the parties has more financial resources than the other, then that party may pay a larger portion of the GAL. GAL is short for guardian ad litem, of the GAL's hourly rate. It really depends. And we have a separate podcast about GALs and how the fees work if you want to check that out. There may be experts that are necessary in your case. So if you have real estate that you are, somebody's going to try to keep the house, for example, you probably will need to go out and get an appraisal on that house, which can cost, $1,000 or so, to figure out what the fair market value is, so that you can figure out how that asset is going to be divided. If there is a business, then you may need to bring an expert in to value the business. That can become very expensive, tens of thousands of dollars to value a business. If it's like a super simple business where it's just somebody who's self-employed, with like a pretty minimal business, oftentimes it's not even worth it to get that business valuation. But if it's a more sophisticated business that generates real income, then you're probably going to want to spend that money on the business valuation. There's other potential experts. If somebody has a pension, you'll need to get a present day valuation on that pension, because a pension, there's 401k accounts that just say, you have $500,000 in your 401k account, but a pension is a monthly payout, and it doesn't have just like a balance. So you need to get an actuary involved who can put a present day value on that pension so that you can compare it to a 401k account or some other asset. There are also discovery expenses. So maybe you have to take the other side's deposition if your case is, getting closer to trial. That, of course, involves the attorney's time for sitting for the deposition, but you will also have to pay a stenographer to come and, type up the deposition and then pay for the transcripts of the deposition. That can cost several $100s, into the thousands of dollars. So there are a lot of costs that can add up separate from your attorney's fees in a divorce case. And those are a lot of them. Another one is mediation. So if your case is getting closer to trial, what parties will often do in order to hopefully avoid a trial is they will have a mediation with a retired judge. So there are a number of retired judges that sort of their specialty is to sit down with parties, spend a whole day with them to hear what both sides have to say and make a recommendation to hopefully help them resolve their case and reach an agreement without having to go to trial. Those retired judges, it might cost $5,000, $7,000 for that judge's time for the day, in addition to paying the attorneys. So it can really add up if you are getting closer to trial and you're having to go through all of these additional steps that are involved in the divorce process.
Well, and to back to your point about the more conflict in your case, the greater your fees are going to be. With everything you just described, when you have higher conflict, typically that means you're not getting a joint valuation of the business. You're each getting your own. You're having competing appraisals, competing earning capacity experts, competing pension values. The less you can agree on to even use the same experts, that means you're doubling the costs associated with getting those values, and then coming to some kind of agreement, whether you end up agreeing on that value or you have to bring it to trial, and then a court has to hear from each of your experts, and then they assign a value based on what expert they essentially find more credible. But that's an example of where conflict really exacerbates the cost of the process.
Right. So you should work with your attorney to figure out if sometimes it doesn't make sense to get a joint expert. But so you should work with your attorney to figure out if in your situation it does make sense to get joint experts. If the other side will agree. Maybe they won't even agree to those joint experts.
And those were mostly, like you were describing, a lot of um financial discovery issues where experts are getting involved to deal with, whether it's valuing assets or figuring out income capacities and et cetera. But before, you indicated a guardian ad litem, right, will be an additional cost if custody's at issue. There are so many other costs that could exacerbate the process with associated with custody disputes, including, parents wanna come in and get they immediately, a lot of times people will say, "I want a psychological evaluation done of the other parent," and then that person's gonna want a psychological evaluation done of the other person. Psychological evaluations are not as common as people think they are. I mean, people come in wanting to do a psych eval of their spouse, to prove that they're, like, an unfit parent, or basically oftentimes they just wanna prove that they're at fault for a lot of what went wrong in the marriage, and psych evals cost, like, at a minimum $10,000. So, again, it's not something that's gonna help your case, unless, again, it's truly an issue of mental health issues that are you have to basically go through this process in order for the court to have the information it needs to make a decision on custody, but short of that, you're not gonna wanna spend your money in that way, especially because the custody value or the psychological evaluations never really come out proving what everyone thinks they're gonna prove.
Right. So let's talk about other things people can do to kind of keep their attorney's fees under control. One is minimizing poor communication with your spouse. So while your divorce is going on, if every time you have a little argument with your spouse, the attorneys have to get involved, that's going to add up. So do your best to try to work, little issues out with your spouse, maybe little parenting issues, small issues about personal property. If somebody's moving out of the house, try to work those out amongst yourselves so that the attorneys aren't being brought in on every little issue, because again, that's their time and it's going to eat up your retainer and it's going to cost you more.
Just
So
yeah, and buy the extra set of cleats or the ballet slippers or whatever it is that the other person isn't sending back with the other kid, and then you're reaching for the phone to call your attorney to tell their attorney to get their kids' extracurricular uniforms and clothes and et cetera all back to you, when you have to transition your kids. It's not worth the phone call. Just buy the item and then keep it for your
right.
use.
Right. Something else that can make costs increase is if you suspect there are hidden assets. So you may have to get a forensic accountant if you really suspect your spouse is hiding assets. Just know that can come with really significant additional costs in attorney's fees and expert fees. I don't say that to mean that it's not worth doing. Sometimes it is, especially if there's a large marital estate and your spouse really is behaving poorly and hiding assets. you know, it it's probably worth taking those extra steps to try to uncover those hidden assets, but just know that it's going to come at a cost, unfortunately, of having to throw extra resources at your case. And that same to be said with custody disputes, getting a GAL involved, a psych eval. We're not saying that it's not worth doing that. Sometimes it is if you have genuine concerns, but just know that it's going to come at an additional cost.
And also know that just because you're paying for these experts and these additional services, it does not mean you're paying for a specific result, right? So you'll get the forensic accountant involved. They're going to do their due diligence and their analysis. They may not find that there's any evidence of hidden assets, right? So you will have spent that money on their services, and then they don't really uncover anything for you to split, right, in the divorce. And again, that's not to say that it wasn't a worthwhile exercise if you really believe that there were hidden assets or income, because that would have meant that any agreement you came to, you would basically doubt the fairness of it always, because you really believe that there was these hidden assets and income. So knowing for sure with certainty that something doesn't exist is of value, right? But just remember when you're retaining services of like a forensic accountant or even a GAL, again, they're going to come out with their professional conclusion and recommendation, and it may not align with what it is you wanted or expected.
Right. And that sort of goes along the lines of just something else that can really make attorneys' fees add up is taking unreasonable settlement positions. So it's one thing to like go in with a proposal of, that's really balanced in your favor. Coming in with that proposal, it happens all the time. We all do it. It's just how negotiating works sometimes. But just be aware that, that proposal that's really in your favor, it's not necessarily reasonable. It's not where your case should end up. And it can really add up. It can lead to your attorney's fees becoming significantly higher if you just stay entrenched in unreasonable settlement positions. So just try to listen to the advice of your attorney. Try to listen to the advice of third parties who are getting involved in your case, whether it's a GAL or a judge in a pretrial or a retired judge in a private mediation. You go into the divorce process, maybe you feel like your spouse is at fault, or, you were treated unfairly in your marriage. You can only get so much out of the divorce process. And, ultimately, if your case goes to trial, it's sort of, you're going to get a certain result within a certain range. And the settlement process, the recommendations that are being made by retired judges, or other third parties, they're generally trying to base that on what they think a likely outcome is at trial. So just try to listen to your attorney or other people who are trying to help you reach an agreement, and listen to what they have to say about where they think your case is going to end up, and try not to remain entrenched in positions that are far away from where your case is likely to end up, because it's just going to make the process drag out for longer and longer.
And then also, what we're talking about is the work that needs to be done to just even get you to a point of settlement or trial to resolve your divorce. But the other big uh, cost factor that comes into play is when there are like a ton of issues that need to be resolved, that need to be dealt with during the pendency of the divorce, and we call those pendente lite motions. So whatever the dispute is, that it's like you can't wait for the final resolution of your case to resolve the issue. You need court attention like immediately during the pendency of the divorce. That really exacerbates your attorney's fees, because that means you're going in for, mid case hearings, and your attorneys are constantly having to communicate with one another about X, Y, and Z issues that are arising, whether that has to do with paying expenses for the household, or you wanting exclusive use of the house, wanting the other person to move out, or custody issues that are coming up, which always feel very time sensitive. And it's like, I can't wait for my case to resolve when I feel like my kid is being harmed as we speak. that's really going to lengthen the divorce process, but then really jack up the cost as well.
Right, right. And then one last thing I think that you should do is just make sure you're vetting who you're hiring for an attorney. Surprised there's some not great divorce attorneys out there like any other industry, and some who will maybe stay entrenched on really unreasonable positions in a way that's really not helping their client. It's not helping them resolve their case. And it can just be, I don't know what their intentions are. Maybe they love the conflict, or they just want the money from the client. And, there's some attorneys who are sort of notorious for just racking up the bill. And then as soon as the client runs out of money to pay additional fees, they'll either settle the case or drop the client and move on. So just vet your attorney's reputation as far as whether they take reasonable positions, how they bill, etc. Because unfortunately, there are some bad eggs out there who will really just not do well by their clients. So ask around about your attorney's reputation before you hire them and get involved with them.
Well, and then the truth as well is there are spouses out there who also want to use the divorce process as almost like a form of punishment and torture for their spouse. So they want the attorney who is going to file the sort of frivolous motions or egregious motions, file anything that they can possibly file to get under the other person's skin, to cause them to have to incur more attorney's fees, and just put them through that process because they can. And so, unfortunately, in that scenario, you have to respond to what is being filed against you during the process. And the only way to get out of it is to end your case, right?
Right. Right.
You have to live
Yeah,
through it.
that's definitely true. That some people use those attorneys as sort of a weapon, but there are other people who are just genuinely like taken advantage of by those attorneys, I think. If you want to use them as a weapon, that's one thing. But if you don't, if you're concerned about being taken advantage of when you really just want to try to be reasonable, just ask around about the reputation of your attorney, particularly particularly for that specific thing of how reasonable are they? Do they try to resolve cases? Do they bill unnecessarily, etc.?
And when possible, the other part of that coin is maintain open communication with your spouse. Be aware of what you're each sort of proposing to the other person, right? You're obviously working through your attorneys, but if you can have communication open with your spouse, they may know that, you can say, well, I told my attorney to propose this or that I would accept this, but the attorney is choosing to be more aggressive, even beyond, and ask for something that you didn't even ask for. Right. So as long as the two of you can communicate as well, what's going on. And that can sometimes be a check on the process and sometimes a check on what the attorneys are saying to one another.
Right. Sometimes it's obviously unrealistic if you just don't have a very good relationship
Right.
with your spouse. Of course, oftentimes you're going through a divorce, so you might not have a good relationship with them. But to the extent that things are amicable and you feel like you can talk to them about these things, it can be good to keep those open lines of
Well, and
communication.
I think on average, a joint goal for both people is to preserve as much as the marital estate as possible to then divide as part of the divorce. And the more that you each are spending on your attorneys, that's just coming out of the marital estate and depleting it. So sometimes being able to kind of set your feelings and differences aside to be practical and, because also not just using it as like a check on attorneys, but just to say, you and your spouse can talk to one another and come up with resolutions where that's possible, right? Where you guys already have all the information, discovery has been exchanged. There's nothing that prevents you two from talking to one another and just working it out and then letting your attorneys know, you know what, we had a really great conversation and we're sort of aligned on this and let's try and resolve it.
Well, as long as there's no restraining order. Sometimes there literally is something that prevents you from talking to one another.
Absolutely.
So just check with your attorney to make sure.
And obviously, like we're talking right now about like the financial cost of the divorce. There's also the emotional cost. So let's like not lose sight of that in all of this. And part of protecting your emotional sanity is like getting through the process and then being able to like move on with your life. And so you should really factor that into whether or not you're agreeing to like take a particular proposal and settle.
Right. It's protecting your own sanity, but also if there's kids involved, it's really protecting the well-being of your kids. The more amicable and quickly you can resolve your case, generally the better it is for your kids.
That's right.
And just, avoid trial at all costs. Trials are multiple days, very expensive. A lot of dirty laundry gets put out there. And if you can avoid that and reach an agreement with your spouse, it's always best. So, Nicole, that's all I got for the basics of, the costs associated with divorce here in Connecticut. Do you have any final words on things you would like to add?
Just that if you're asking yourself, like, how much is this divorce going to cost? Like, think more, what are the big issues going to be in my case and what can I do to manage them in order to reduce the overall cost as well. It's not because it's not just what your attorney can do, it's what can you do on your end to try and keep costs down.
Right.
And there are ways to approach that.
Yeah, and there's various approach. Maybe you just go to. I talked about mediation with a retired judge, but maybe you and your spouse just go to mediation directly, where you're working with a mediator and you don't even necessarily have your own attorneys representing you. That can keep costs down. Or there's collaborative divorce, which we'll do a separate episode that talks about collaborative divorce. There are other approaches that can sort of keep costs down, but we can talk about those on a later date. But for now, we are going to wrap it up. So thank you for watching this week's episode of the Irretrievable Breakdown podcast, where Nicole and I discuss all things divorce. As usual, if you have any additional questions, you can contact our office. And if you're looking for representation in a divorce or family law case here in Connecticut, you can contact our office as well. Thanks for watching, and we will see you next week.